Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, the atrocities perpetrated by Russian forces in Ukraine have captured both attention and condemnation. Our guest today is an expert on East European affairs and a critic of Canadian government policy as a response to the Russian invasion. Marcus Kolga joins us today. He's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a public policy think tank. Welcome, Marcus.
Thanks so much for having me on, Tony.
I guess first, I'd love to get I know it's just an ever-changing story every minute, every hour, every day. What's your assessment of where things stand with the war at this stage?
Well, you're right. I mean, the story is ever-changing every day, but one thing that remains constant is Vladimir Putin's brutality, the brutality of his forces, and the terror that he is inflicting on the people of Ukraine with his invasion. Where we're at right now, we're in week 7 of this invasion. It looks as though Vladimir Putin and the officials that enable him have recognized the failures of the invasion over the past several weeks. Their failure to take Kiev in what many Western experts assumed would fall in 2 to 3 days. Kiev, the Ukrainian forces held out for all of these weeks, and in fact have been able to push Russian forces out of Kiev. And so Vladimir Putin now is engaging in a reset of his strategy. I think that he is recalibrating his goals to focus primarily on Eastern Ukraine, which many of us thought was the initial objective of this war. And so he's pulled back his forces. He's resupplying them, reconstituting them, and will probably focus, like I said, on Eastern Ukraine and the southern portion of Ukraine between Mariupol, the Russian border, and Crimea to create a land bridge between Russia and Crimea. He's also conducted a major shakeup of the leaders of this invasion. He's put in the leadership position a general named Dvornikov. He's better known as the butcher of Syria. He was in charge of the Russian forces that assisted in the suppression of the Syrian uprising and in support of the government there. During his time in charge of those forces, Russian forces engaged in mass chemical warfare against the Syrian civilian populations, engaged and supported mass torture of captives, and in the systematic rape of civilian Syrian women. And so this new general that's being put in place, he specializes clearly in terror, in depopulizing various different urban regions. And so the brutality of this invasion that we've seen over the past several weeks will probably become much worse and intensify in the coming weeks.
We've been looking at the Russian offense, but we've also, as Canadians and as members of NATO generally, looking at NATO's response and Canada's response. So I'd love to get your take on both of those aspects of this story.
Look, I think most of us, the experts who understand who Vladimir Putin is, what his objectives are, one of the things that we've been calling for, and certainly the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky have been calling for, is more lethal defensive weapons to help the Ukrainians defend their sovereignty. It's become very clear, and it was clear early on, that NATO would not be putting boots on the ground to defend Ukraine. There just isn't the political will and support in many European capitals for this. So weapons is what we need to send to the Ukrainians. Now, Canada has sent some defensive weapons, including some anti-tank, anti-armor missiles, some old grenades, and some rifles, but also importantly, protective armor, helmets, and such. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately for Ukraine, our Eastern NATO partners in the Baltic states have, and Eastern Europe in general, have sent a steady supply of weapons. Estonia, for example, just yesterday surpassed the $250 million mark in insofar as aid, lethal defensive aid that is being sent to Ukraine. This is a country.
We're going to take a break right there, Marcus. Sure. Hold that thought. We'll come back right after the break. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm here with Marcus Kolga. He's of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Marcus, please continue with your assessment of NATO's response and Canada's response to the crisis and the invasion in Ukraine.
So as I mentioned before the break, Canada's Eastern European allies in NATO have done a terrific job of helping Ukraine and supplying weapons to help it defend itself. Estonia just yesterday, in fact, surpassed the $250 million mark in regards to lethal defensive weapons that it's sent to assist Ukraine. This is a country that has a population the size of Calgary. When we compare Estonia's contribution to Canada's, which is just under 50 million at this point, it's very clear that Canada needs to do much more, needs to step up to help Ukraine defend itself. Now, the budget, as announced by Chrystia Freeland, committed $500 million in new aid, which is welcome. There's apparently a deal in place to send Canadian-built armored vehicles. But what Canada really needs to be doing is sending lethal defensive weapons in addition to these armored vehicles. That includes Harpoon missiles that we have in storage. These are surface-to-sea missiles that would assist Ukraine in defending the very important port of Odessa. Odessa is a piece of critical infrastructure in Ukraine that's used to ship much of its grain to the wider world. There is concern that Russia already has targeted Odessa and in its maritime infrastructure. It could seek to target it again. And if it is destroyed, this could cause a major worldwide grain shortage and could destabilize many parts of the world. And so those Harpoon missiles, the ones that are launched, these batteries that are basically you could load onto the back of a pickup truck, or a truck that's slightly larger than a pickup truck. These missiles are fired from the surface, from land, and target vessels, Russian military vessels at sea, and would provide a major deterrence with regards to any potential action against Odessa. They need to get close enough and could be in range of these Harpoons. So this is something that Canada should be sending, not in a week's time, but immediately to help protect Odessa. And we should be sending further surface-to-air missiles, more anti-armor missiles to help Ukraine prepare and defend itself for this new coming offensive that Russia is going to undertake in the east of the country.
I can't help but ask, as a result of your commentary, do you expect there to be a Ukrainian grain crop that can be exported, given the situation that's going on right now?
Well, look, we saw pictures early on during the war. The Ukrainian farmers needed to plant those crops already several weeks ago, and a lot of those very brave farmers took to their tractors and did that because it's part of their livelihood. But they also know that Ukraine needs to supply the world with its grain. So the Ukrainian farmers have really been brave and have planted their crop. Of course, this is going to be far more difficult in the east, where Russia has pretty much leveled the land, destroying cities and leveling farms and all sorts of other infrastructure. So there is still a chance for a crop to be exported, grain to be exported this summer from Ukraine.
Now, Marcus, you've been outspoken about how Russian diplomats are getting a free pass here in Canada. What do you see that should be happening instead?
Well, look, those who believe that we shouldn't be expelling Russian diplomats from Canada argue that we need to keep channels of communication open. Look, if the Canadian government, if Justin Trudeau wants to communicate with the Russian government about what's going on in Ukraine, he can do that through Twitter. He can pick up the phone and call Sergei Lavrov. He could probably contact someone in the president's office. We don't need a Russian ambassador sitting here in Ottawa. What we need to be doing is expelling that ambassador the consuls general in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, and the agents that work in those consulates and the embassy in Ottawa. We need to send them packing to send a signal that we will not stand for the kind of barbaric activity that the Russian army is engaging in Ukraine. Keeping them here only sends the wrong signal. It enables that sort of behavior and legitimizes the Putin regime, the criminal Putin regime here in Canada. So we need to send them packing.
We're going to continue our discussion with Marcus Kolga, our guest today, after this break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum. We have with us Marcus Kolga of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Marcus, you've also called for the passage of something called the Foreign Influence Registry Act. Can you explain what that will do?
This is a piece of legislation that is moving through the Senate right now, introduced by Senator Zakos. This is a piece of legislation that would require anyone serving the interests of a hostile foreign regime, whether it be the Russians, whether it be Iran, China, North Korea, any other, later identified after the legislation is passed. This piece of legislation would require those specific individuals who are advocating on behalf of those regimes in Ottawa to register themselves as doing so with this foreign influence registry. And by not doing so, there are specific penalties that those individuals would incur, including relatively substantial fines, possible jail time. And what this registry does is it basically introduces a very strong measure of transparency. Look, organizations, governments all lobby government. This would ensure that those who are doing so on behalf of those hostile foreign regimes, that they are identified. And so what this piece of legislation does, it strengthens our democracy by allowing us to understand who these people are and what they're talking to our elected officials about. And it is agnostic of any sort of specific nationality. It doesn't prevent any community organizations, activists, and such from advocating with our government, but it does expose those individuals, Canadians and otherwise, who are advocating on behalf of these hostile foreign regimes.
Marcus, do you think that more sanctions are going to make any difference in terms of deterring Putin and his regime?
Well, sure. I mean, we still have a long way to go with our sanctions regime. We should be banning all oil imports, refined products, and quite frankly, we should be banning all imports right now, at least for the time being, placing a moratorium on them from Russia. I think the Canadian government has done so far a fairly good job of keeping up with our allies with regards to our sanctions, and we can see that they're starting to bite. Russia just defaulted on its loan obligations 2 days ago, promising its investors to pay them in rubles. Nobody wants rubles. This is a currency that is currently about as valuable as toilet paper. The longer that these sanctions are maintained, to be quite frank, the better chance they have in changing the behavior of the Russian government, perhaps motivating those around Vladimir Putin to undertake some sort of efforts to change the leadership of their government, and most importantly, and unfortunately, the Russian people will, eventually suffer. I don't think they'll suffer in any sort of serious way. I mean, they won't be able to go to McDonald's to buy a Big Mac eventually. They may not get parts for their iPhone. But they will still survive. These sanctions will not prevent them from eating and doing the basic functioning as human beings. But the hope is that those sanctions will motivate the Russian people as well to stand up and take notice of who their president is, what he's doing, what the leadership of that government is doing, and hopefully they too will rise up and eventually demand a change. But we got to give sanctions time to work, and we've got to make sure that, unlike in 2014, where after Russia invaded Crimea, we placed some sanctions on Russia. It didn't take much more than a year for things to go back to business as usual. We cannot go back to business as usual. These sanctions need to be sustained and need to remain in place for the long term in order for them to have the desired effect, which is, quite frankly, a change in leadership in Moscow.
Yeah, because you're not expecting Putin to wake up one morning and say, "Oh, these sanctions are biting, therefore the invasion is off."
No, I don't expect anything to change Putin's course right now. He's not going to wake up and just turn off the invasion. He is going to make sure that the invasion continues. It could this invasion and the brutality of it could last yet for several months, perhaps years to come. But I don't see a change coming anytime soon. But sanctions will help with that change in the long run.
Let's continue our discussion with Marcus Kolga after the break. He is a representative of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, as well as many other facets of his life. Marcus, hang on. We'll be taking a brief break. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute's Marcus Kolga, talking about Russia, Ukraine, of course. Marcus, has Europe finally learned its lesson about buying from Russia, trading with Russia? Is this a real turning point for Europe?
Well, I think the last 7 weeks have been a real wake-up call. I think that a lot of European nations, including those in the Baltic states, much of Eastern Europe, Poland as well, have been warning the rest of Europe about the nature of the regime. They've been warning against an over-reliance on Russian gas. The Lithuanians themselves, just 6-7 years ago, built their own liquefied natural gas terminal just off its coast in order to diversify its own energy needs. Lithuania is among the only nations in Europe right now that is completely independent of any sort of Russian gas. And it seems that Russia is waking up to this. Emmanuel Macron, when he was at NATO about 2 weeks ago, said explicitly that Europe will in the future rely more on U.S. gas, and named Canada as well, and said that he was hopeful that Canada would help Europe wean itself off of its over-reliance on Russian gas. And I think that the Canadian government needs to listen to Europe. We have our troops in Latvia right now. We're a member of NATO. Kinetic warfare is one thing, but energy security is extremely important as well. We've seen that Vladimir Putin has, because he does control nearly 50% of all of the gas that's used in Europe. He has one hand he has on his guns and missiles, the other hand he has on the taps that bring natural gas into Europe, and he opens and closes that valve when at will, and is ready to use it as one weapon against Europe. And so Canada, with our vast energy resources in Alberta, we can help our European allies wean themselves off of this Russian gas by simply expanding our pipelines to the Atlantic coast and expediting the approval of current LNG terminal. This is liquefied natural gas terminals that are expected to be built on the Atlantic coast, and build new ones, so that we can get our gas over to the Europeans, who have explicitly asked Canada to do so. This is a win-win for both Europe and Canada, and it contributes to the stability of Europe. It contributes to the stability of the Western world. So it's something that we need to really seriously start looking at immediately to again benefit Canada and our European allies.
And do you think that, from your analysis, that the Canadian government, the Alberta government, perhaps other forces in our society are now sort of awake to that opportunity and how we can help wean everybody off Russian oil and gas? This is something that you think you can see in the future for us?
Well, look, I think everyone is keeping their eye on the environment, on climate change, and we should be doing that. Global security, protecting democracy from authoritarians is something else that we need to be doing. So we need to balance all these things, and we can't just simply reject, the expanding the existing pipelines and exporting gas to Europe. The Europeans need gas. They are transitioning to green energy as well, but gas is that intermediary. We can help them with that. I don't see why we would object to doing that. It's Canadian gas, exporting the Canadian gas to Europe is a win-win for everyone, and I don't think that environmental considerations need to trump that. We just need to balance them.
We've got less than 30 seconds left here, Marcus. Are you optimistic about the way things are going, or pessimistic? Give us your assessment.
I'm optimistic about the way that the Ukrainians have been able to defend themselves. I'm optimistic about the way that the Western world has come together to stand up for Ukraine. If we can continue that, I'm optimistic. But I'm not optimistic about Vladimir Putin ending his invasion anytime soon. I think that it'll only get worse and possibly expand.
Marcus Kolga of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, thanks for joining us today. It's been very interesting.
Anytime, Tony.
Interesting discussion with Marcus Kolga, talking about Russia, Ukraine, of course, and Canada's role and Canada's responsibility, which goes beyond providing arms to the Ukrainians. We've got natural gas. We've got other things that we can contribute to this as well. Very interesting. Thanks for watching today.